Okay, welcome back. For the first couple weeks of class, we have looked at the earliest expressions of human creativity, going all the way back to the Paleolithic era, our caveman ancestors, and looking at the things that are not just tools for physical survival, but were more on the symbolic, creative level, the truth and beauty level of being human. And so we looked at a variety of symbols that get repeated over and over again, and that are still used today in marketing, all kinds of advertising, logos. When we look back at the ancient use of these symbols, we can only really have sort of some broad outlines of what these things must have meant. And by looking at uses of these symbols later in great civilizations, when we do have writing, when we study modern primitive tribes and the way they associate symbol and ritual, we're able to project back a little bit and get some glimpse into the mental landscape of our earliest ancestors. But there's a limit to the kind of detail and richness we can really understand from that. Luckily, a few thousand years ago, some of our ancestors invented writing. And once we have written records, we're then able to preserve in detail the stories that must have always associated these symbolic things, and we can now examine them more carefully. So we're moving today from symbol to what we're able to get with a story, and that is allegory. What is an allegory? Can you think of any examples of allegories you've heard in your life? It's what? Is one big giant allegory. So it's not just a story that has some exciting plot. The plot carries you somewhere else. So how do we describe the kind of deeper meaning that's underneath the surface? Okay, so the symbol means one thing on the surface literal level, but there's a deeper meaning underneath it. Okay, allegories are symbolic stories. Okay, when you think of the nursery rhymes and children's tales that you heard when you were young, those fairy tales were examples of allegories. You had simple animal-like characters that represented something on a deeper level. How many of y'all know the story of the Three Little Pigs? Okay. So the Three Little Pigs. Now, even when you were a kid listening to that, when you were 5 years old, did you really think these were literally about three porcines who, without opposable thumbs, were building houses out of sticks and bricks and stuff? No, because you weren't a dense little kid. You already understood instantly that there was something deeper, something symbolic that was meant. So in the story of the Three Little Pigs, when the wolf comes along, what does the wolf symbolize? Now, there's always wolves in these stories, right? They symbolize threats, adversity, anything that a challenge that you have to rise to. Why wolves so often? Because these are European fairy tales. And until pretty recently, there were wolves, that were still a danger to people living in villages and so forth. So these European tales, it's always the wolf. So the wolf is a symbol. But the story, what the pigs do, what they build, how it turns out, what the plot does, that is the allegory, the symbolic story. And through storytelling and the allegorical meanings conveyed in them, our ancestors communicated the most important and profound insights about life. Okay? And they communicated these things through something that we call mythology. Now, the word mythology today is sometimes used in a derogatory way. People will refer to your idea or opinion about something, oh, that's just an old myth, or like it's an old wives' tale. You ought not to be so naive as to believe such a simple thing. Because we got science and fact checkers and Snopes.com and Google, and you should be able to go out and investigate and know things better. But scholars take mythology very seriously. We teach courses in mythology here. We have scholars who specialize in their career in the study of mythology. The word mythology comes from the Greek word mythos. And mythos means story. And there's nothing in the term that says whether it's a true story or a false story or whether it's a simple story. They're simply stories. And in a sense, all ancient myths are true, or they have truth in them. That's why they told the stories, because there are valuable truths that need to be conveyed. The story of the Three Little Pigs does not record historical events, but doesn't it convey an important truth? What's the truth of this story? Well, literally, the plot tells you build your house well, but how can you extrapolate and generalize from that? What is the essential lesson we learn from the 2 pigs who build lousy houses and the one that spends a lot longer building a good one?
Don't be lazy in what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Don't be lazy. Okay, don't do some, half-effort job. Put your work in the beginning, and then you'll be secure when adversity comes along in the form of the wolf or whatever. Right. So the story of the 3 little pigs has truth. Aren't you all going to teach your children to work hard and not be lazy? It's an important truth you're going to convey to them, right? Okay, so the story has truth in it. And all these stories do. And the study of these stories and the truths they conveyed is a very essential part of studying the humanities and just really of understanding yourself. We might think that in our modern world of science and technology and logic and philosophy that we've moved beyond storytelling, but that's not really the case. Writing and the ability to preserve these stories allows us to peer back pretty far in time. But when we think about our science and our philosophy, that only goes back about 25 centuries. Our species has been around for over 200,000 years. So it's only the last 2 or 3% of human history where we've had science and these ways of explaining things. The vast majority of the time our species has been on this planet, we have communicated what we understood through stories. And we're just hardwired to understand stories. We're hardwired to respond to them. That's what we hold on to in our minds. Watch any politician trying to convince you to vote this way or that way. All that stuff where he talks about, this bill and this policy, these will do these things, a lot of numbers and data just washes over you. But then the politicians know, tell a story. Tell an anecdote about some woman in Topeka, Kansas, who's having trouble feeding her children. She can't make enough money, and that's why we got to do this. Why do politicians pepper their speeches with stories of real-life people and what's going on with them? Because it's engaging. You respond to that. You hold on to that. Storytelling works. And we need to understand something about the nature of stories, really to understand ourselves. So today we're going to examine a story that you read over the weekend, the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is part of the creation myths of the Mayan people. The Mayans are one of the more sophisticated civilizations among the Native Americans in the New World. Not all Native American cultures invented writing or built monumental architecture or things like that, but the Mayans did all this stuff. So their culture was as sophisticated as the great civilizations of the old world that we've talked about. And their story, the Popol Vuh, is a very long sort of religious national narrative of their people. It is the longest written anything from the New World, in fact. What you read was just a little tiny piece of it that talks about where the world came from. So what we're going to do, take notes very carefully on this. We're going to analyze the plot of the story and see where the plot takes us, down to the deeper levels of meaning, okay? So in the beginning, the Mayan gods create the world. And the world is beautiful, and they make all the trees and the birds and the flowers and the ocean and the sun. But then they decide that they need some creatures on this world. And what is the purpose that the Mayan gods have in mind for making creatures? What do they want from them? Yeah.
Worship.
They want to be worshipped and?
Like loved.
And loved.
Someone like to talk to.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing. Anybody? Yeah. They want to know their names and communicate and worship them, and also appreciate the world that they've built. Okay? Now, we rarely stop and think about this, but why do you suppose humanity has always assumed that the gods want us to worship them? Why do they care? I mean, if there really are gods up there, aren't they of such alien cosmic level beings? Don't they have like really more cosmic things to think about? Why do they care if we worship them? Do you make the insects that live in your backyard worship you? No? Do you make all the worms line up on one side of the yard and never on the other and build monumental architecture in your honor? No? That'd be kind of weird, right? So, I mean, we're probably further beneath the gods than worms are beneath us. Why do we assume they care? Because that's the only way we can relate to them. Here's a very long vocabulary word for you. Goes on and on and on. Or it takes forever to write on the board. Anthropomorphism. Anybody know that word? Anthropomorphism?
Wait a minute, I think I've seen that I heard about it on one of my usual searches for Wikipedia today.
It could, in fact, come up in Wikipedia.
I heard about Krampus was one.
The who?
Krampus.
Krampus. Yeah, okay, I can see where it might be applied there. Let's see if this actually works for you then. First of all, don't be scared of big words like this. Big words are just a bunch of little words ganging up to intimidate you. No reason to be afraid. Just break them down into their root words. We have anthropo, morph, and ism. Do you know any other words that begin with anthropo? Anthropology. What do anthropologists study? No. Yes? Nope. Anthropologists study human origins. Anthropologists are the ones who dig up old bones and figure out the evolutionary family tree and the human beginnings. This is anthropology. So anthropo means human. Anthropology is the study of human origins. All right, this one's easier. What does morph mean? To change. What kind of change?
To something new? Or
Right. Well, that would assume, but what as a change of time, a change of position? What kind of change?
change of time?
Change of body, a change of form. Okay, so morph means a change of form. So human change of form. Anthropomorphism is the word that describes the ancients' habits of imagining their gods and other non-human things with human characteristics. Whenever you're projecting human characteristics on something that's not human, you are anthropomorphizing this thing. Okay? So think about the ancient Greeks, who very famously made statues of Zeus and Apollo with these perfect but human-looking bodies. I mean, if Zeus is really a god that wields lightning up there, he's probably not limited by a little mortal body like that. But you can't relate to such things. And so they gave them human form. There's a literary term that's the equivalent of this. Anybody know it? Personification, exactly. What you use in a literature class, personification in history, humanities, culture, we call anthropomorphism. So we anthropomorphize the gods. We project human physical traits on them, more interestingly, character traits. And just as you, if you were to write a poem or build something in your garage that you thought was cool, you'd want other people to appreciate it and you want to share it with others. So we imagine that the gods who made the world must have wanted to share it and talk about it and find out how cool we thought it was. So who knows what the gods really want, but we project these ideas on them. So for whatever reason, they decide that they want human beings to worship them, to love them, and to appreciate the world that they made. So they make the world of nature. Now it's time to make these creatures that are going to fit their needs. And then what unfolds is several failed attempts to make the right kinds of creatures. And everyone along the way, they fall short in one way or another. And in all of these, it's not just the adventure story of how we got humans, it's really a lesson for you. The cultural functions of these myths are not just to tell you where the world came from, it's to give you instructions on proper and successful living today. So each one of these teaches by way of negative example how not to be a good human. And then you extrapolate what their problems were, and then you avoid those mistakes. Okay? So first the gods make the animals. All the animals of the jungle. Now on the literal level of the plot, what's wrong with the animals?
They can't speak or talk to each other.
They can't speak.
They don't know their name.
And if they can't communicate, they can't call the gods' names and pray to them. And so they're not what the gods are looking for. So what do the gods do with the animals? What is their fate? No, they don't just kill them.
They kill each other.
They kill each other. Okay. So the gods send the animals off to live in the jungle where they kill and eat each other. So the ancient Mayans, looking at how they lived in their civilization and looking at how animals live out in the jungle, noticed something distinctive about it. Animals exist by killing and eating each other in this savage way. And they lived in a civilized way. And this seems to be their defining characteristic. And as they listened to all the animals and the different sounds they all make, and the seeming inability for any of them to talk to each other, they decided that was the problem. They can't communicate, and therefore they kill and eat each other. All right? So that's the plot. But symbolically, the metaphor can be applied to us. What lesson do we derive from the failure of the animals?
Different languages.
Well, we might learn that, but what lesson do we learn that we should apply to our lives by seeing how the animals failed? We got to learn to communicate. We must communicate. And if we don't learn to communicate, what will happen to us? We'll end up killing and destroying each other. Exactly. And think about it, that makes a certain amount of sense. Think about the last argument you had with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. Didn't it all come down to an inability to see each other's point of view? You get locked into your own position and you don't want to see how someone else is looking at this? People make wars and fight with their neighbors and so forth, all coming down to a lack of communication. When we, have wars with other countries, it's all about being unable to see other people's point of view. So the Mayans, from the example of the animals, took the lesson that communication, being able to communicate, see each other's point of view, is essential to successful and proper living. So that's it for the animals. So the God's going to try again. And then there's a series of attempts to make proper humans out of various materials. And the material itself is symbolic. The stuff that the people are made of are symbolic. And then what happens with them is the symbolic story, the allegory. So step one, we're going to make people out of mud. Now, what is the literal characteristic of mud? What is mud like? It's dirty.
Soft.
It's soft. It's squishy. Doesn't stand up well. All right. So mud, soft, and limp. And these mudmen, how do they live their lives?
They couldn't really, because they couldn't stand up and they couldn't really talk.
They can't stand. They talk gibberish. It makes no sense. What do they do all day?
Lay around.
They just lay around, right? So the gods aren't too happy with them, so what do the gods do? They destroy them. And is it even difficult to destroy them? No. A simple rainstorm just breaks them up and they wash away. So these mudmen are easily destroyed. Now, at this point in your reading guide, I started asking you, what do these things really symbolize? So what do the mudmen seem to symbolize? What kind of people? Do you know people like these mudmen?
Yeah.
You went to high school with people like this, didn't you? Yeah, who are these people?
Lazy people.
Lazy people, exactly. These are the lazy slackers in the world. Are they in class right now? Working on their education? Planning for their future? No. What are they doing right now while you're here in school? Laying on the couch, right? Playing some video games. When mom gets home, they'll jump up and act like they were job hunting or something today or doing their homework. They're not. They're doing bong heads all day. You know that. Now, what's going to happen to these people when you go to your 10-year high school reunion? They're not going to change. They'll still be doing the same thing, right? You will have had your career. You'll be successful. You'll have grown and developed, and they're still going to be stuck right where they were in high school, right? Because they're not doing anything, right? We have a phrase today, a colloquialism, that involves a piece of furniture and a tuber vegetable. What do we call these people?
Potato.
Couch potatoes, exactly. What we call couch potatoes, they would have called mudmen. It means the exact same thing for them. All right. So, what do we take from this? Obviously, don't be a lazy slacker. And get busy with your life. Be productive. Do something with it. These mudmen, with all the potential they had, just laid around and did nothing at all. And that's simply not appropriate. You're not entitled to just squander all of the potential and all the abilities you have doing nothing. There's something wrong with that. Okay? Think about Leonardo da Vinci and all the great things he accomplished. Painting, technology, engineering, art. Imagine if Leonardo da Vinci in the 15th century Italian Renaissance had decided, I don't want to learn how to paint and build things. That sounds hard. I live in Italy. We've got good red wine here. I'm just going to drink wine all day. Imagine Leonardo da Vinci decided to be a wino. The world would have never had all the great things that he invented and developed and all the things he created that bettered humanity. So we're simply not entitled to do this. We cannot waste our talents and our potentials. The story doesn't tell you what you should do with your life, but do something with it. Be ready for what's coming. All right, so they didn't work out so well. So the gods are going to try again. And this time they decide to make something, use a little more durable material. And they make men out of wood. Now, is wood better than mud?
Yeah.
Seems they're a little bit better. They stand upright, they do things, they're stronger. But what's the problem with the mudmen, or the woodmen?
They're heartless.
They're described as being heartless, lifeless. Their faces have no expression.
They're ugly.
Did it say they were ugly?
Like yellow and pale and dry.
They were yellow and pale and dry, so I guess they were not terribly attractive looking to them either. Okay, but what really matters here in an allegory is what happens. So we get a description of these creatures, but then what they do is what matters. And you notice how the plot kind of slows down and gets more extensive at this point? There's a lot more detail that suddenly comes in. So these details are likely pretty important. So what do the mudmen do that the gods are not happy with? They beat their animals. They beat and starve their animals. What else do they do?
They cut off trees.
Okay, so they rip off tree branches.
They burn the bottom of their pots.
They burn their cooking pots. And the last thing? They forgot the names of their gods. Okay. So those are the details of the plot. These are the things that are going to cause trouble for them later. But what we need to do to take a meaningful lesson out of this is extrapolate the characteristics that are being described. Just like in a piece of literature, when you're reading a novel, you get certain ideas communicated through concrete details of plot. We have the same thing going on here. And this is more teaching by negative example, proper and successful ways of living. So what we need to do is extrapolate what they're doing that's wrong, what characteristic the gods are not happy with, and then we can figure out what the opposite is, which must be what the gods do want us to do. So they beat their animals. Cute little puppy dogs. You just beat them and starve them. What kind of people would do such a thing? Horrible people. Now, I need a more descriptive word.
People with no souls, so no hearts.
Okay, you might conclude that they have no soul because they do such a thing, but we need the adjective that describes such a person.
Heartless.
Heartless. Okay, so there's a metaphor for it to be heartless. Cruel. Who said cruel? That's a good word. They exhibit cruelty in their behavior. This is the hard part of writing essays, by the way. Figuring out what words to write down in your papers. Because a lot of words kind of tell you what you're thinking about or what you mean, but you have to write for other people to read your essays. And finding just the right word that says exactly what you need it to say and need it to mean, that's the tricky part. So we got to find the best words we can. Cruelty perfectly describes somebody that would beat an innocent animal. And if the gods don't like cruelty, then what is it that they must want from us? Kindness. So we learn through this negative example that we should act with kindness in our lives. They burn their cooking pots. Okay, so they're careless. It's not bad. I mean, think about it. Some of you have probably just moved out of your parents' house, right? Graduated high school, you started college, live in your own little apartment, got your little Walmart cooking set and everything. But your whole life, mom and dad have been doing the cooking. And now suddenly you have to learn to cook because you figure out that eating out's not healthy and too expensive. So you go get your ramen noodles and your macaroni and cheese, right? And you fill up some water. And maybe you don't know at first that you don't cook everything on high. There's other settings on the dial, but you don't know that. So there you are boiling your ramen noodles. Maybe you get distracted. You come back and all that macaroni is burnt to the bottom and it's a miserable mess that takes days to scrape off, right? Okay, so you made a mistake because you were ignorant of how to go about cooking this food. That's okay. People make mistakes. It's all right. to not know something at first. But if a year from now you are still burning your ramen noodles on the bottom of your cooking pot, what is your problem?
It's bad. Your kids cook.
Is that negligent?
I think the word is you're stupid is the problem. And that's not okay. It's okay. It's fine to be ignorant. You can't know everything all at the beginning. You have to learn from your mistakes. But people that refuse to learn from their mistakes, that make the same mistake over and over again, that's stupidity. And the gods don't like you to be stupid. So what do they want from you?
Be smart.
And how do you become smart?
Learn from your mistakes.
Okay, so we need a word that means someone who is able to learn from their mistakes. We need an adjective.
Wise or wisdom.
Well, hopefully it will lead to wisdom one day.
Intelligence.
Okay. Well, we all have our whatever degrees of intelligence. It's how you use it that matters.
Brain.
We know it resides in our brains. But what does it mean to be the kind of person that learns from their mistakes and improves? What do you have to be? Thoughtful. That's a good one. I want you to be thoughtful. If you just think about what you're doing, you can see the causes of your mistakes, improve upon them, and not be stupid. They go running through the jungle, ripping off tree branches. These tree branches could be useful, right? What can you do with tree branches? You can start a fire to cook your food. You can make weapons. Make shelters out of it. You can thatch your roof with it. Okay? These tree branches have all kinds of functions. They just go running, ripping them off, leaving them on the ground to rot. What kind of person does such a thing? They are being perhaps inconsiderate towards nature and their fellows, but somebody that just takes all these valuable resources and squanders them.
Wasteful.
They're what?
Wasteful.
They're wasteful. Exactly. And if the gods don't want you to be wasteful, what do they want you to be? Resourceful. Now we're getting it. Finally, they forget the names of their gods. So what kind of a person is neglectful of their religious responsibilities? Need a word for that. A word that means someone who's neglectful of their religious responsibilities. You might not know a word for this. Probably don't use it very often. But the best word to describe this is the word impious. Have any of you ever used the word impious in a sentence before in your life? No. It's not a word high schoolers are going to use very often. The word pious or piety means to be appropriate in your religious behavior, to be mindful of your religious responsibilities, to remember and sacrifice to the gods or whatever it is your gods want. So to be impious is to be lacking in this. And if the gods don't want you to be impious, obviously what do they want you to be? Pious. And in fact, that was the ultimate reason for making these creatures in the first place. They're trying to make properly pious creatures who will appreciate the world the gods created and love and thank the gods for them and worship them. All right, well, these characters turned out to be an utter failure and did not meet the gods' needs. So the gods are going to destroy them with something classic in ancient mythology. They're going to send a flood, a cataclysmic flood. Almost every ancient body of religious literature has got a flood story in it. They're probably so common because civilizations tend to be built on rivers. We have a supply of water, rivers flood occasionally, and these are disastrous, destructive events that tend to be remembered. So they send the flood, and the woodmen are suffering, they're trying to escape, and are they getting any help? No. What happened? These animals that can maybe swim them to safety are not helping them. Those cooking pots aren't helping them. Why is nothing helping them? Because they're mean, because these people suck. Exactly. And so all the things that they were cruel and hateful and violent towards now turn on them and do not help them. I bet you all recognize the general lesson lying behind that one, didn't you? How do we express that lesson? Treat others the way you want to be treated. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How else can you express that same lesson? Any Eastern mystics in here? Have you ever heard the phrase, what goes around comes around?
I
That's a Western expression of an idea called karma. The actions and the energy you put out into the world is what comes back to you. So you put negative things out, negative things come back. So it comes full circle on them, and all the creatures they'd abused, none of them helps them now, and they are mostly utterly destroyed. But a few of them did survive. According to the story, what became of the few survivors of the flood? They became the monkeys. Now, the strange thing about that is that we've already had the origin of the animals explained. At the beginning of the story, all the animals of the jungle got created. So why is there a separate part of the story to explain monkeys? What was significant about them that needed its own story? Yes, ma'am.
Because monkeys are really close to humans.
Exactly. Because of all the creatures in the jungle, they noticed that the monkeys were the most similar to human beings. They're basically shaped like us. We're not shaped like jaguars or parrots or anything. They're shaped like us. They can kind of imitate our behavior. They seem almost like near humans, kind of failed humans. And of course, modern, genetics and what's the word I'm looking for? Evolutionary theory bears this out. We know that they are our closest ancestors in the animal world. The Mayans understood this as well, and they needed to explain not just where this other animal came from, but why it is that of all the animals they're so similar, but not quite like us. So this is a story that is called an etiology. Vocabulary word. It's an important part of mythology. An etiology is an origin story for some little weird detail of the world around you. The little oddities and curiosities that just require some kind of an explanation. And when you find these little things peppered in larger religious narratives, that's what they are called. Let me give you another example of one. The Mayans also tell the story about how the parrots got their many colors. Well, most birds have one, maybe two dominant colors on them. Parrots are this like wildly colored creature, right? Ever wonder how did parrots get so colorful? What's the purpose of that? Well, the Mayans explain it to you. In the beginning, the gods made all the birds, and all the birds were plain and just sort of pale and uncolored. And the gods thought, well, this is no good. The world should be more colorful. So the gods created a rainbow, and they invited all the birds to come up by species and select a color of the rainbow to be their color. So the robins, they all chose red, and the finches chose yellow, blue jays chose blue, obviously. You can probably guess how the rest of the story is going to go, can't you? Who's the last bird in line? Parrots. And when the parrot finally gets to the front of the line, what's the problem? There's no more colors. They've all been distributed. So there's the poor parrot with no colors of its own. So what do the other birds decide to do? They each give a little bit of their own color. And that's why the parrot is multicolored. Okay. So that gives you, for them, a literal explanation for why parrots are unique in being so multicolored. But as long as you're going to tell a story, you might as well get some extra mileage out of it, because the story also teaches an important lesson in how to live your life. What value does it teach? The value of sharing. Exactly. Why should we let one go without when we all have plenty? If we all just donate a little of what we have, nobody has to go without, and you're hardly going to notice the little bit you donated. The value of sharing. Isn't that something you're going to teach your kids one day? You ought to share? Okay, well, there's a nice story to teach it with. All right, so this is an etiology. Religious literature is full of etiologies. Many of you may know Bible stories that explain why there are rainbows in the sky, or why snakes crawl on the ground and don't have legs, or why women have pain in childbirth. Okay? These are all etiologies as well. All right, so it's time now finally to make some decent human beings. The ones made out of mud and wood didn't work, so the gods finally figure out the right material to make it with. They're going to make them out of corn. Why corn? Why is that the right thing to make them out of?
Probably the most had the most of it, probably.
Right, it's the most abundant plant that they had. It's their major staple, their major source of complex carbohydrates and so forth. And in fact, the ancients, possibly the Mayans or the ones before them, but it was the Native Americans in South Central America who did not just discover corn, they invented corn. Corn does not occur naturally in nature. It was created by grafting different grasses together until they started to make kernels that were very large and edible. So they invented corn, inspired by the wisdom of their gods. They are literally the people of the corn. Not the creepy movie, but So they're made actually out of two parts of corn. Partly corn meal, which is their bodies. And also, and here's the fun part, corn liquor, which is their what? Their energies and strengths. So they thought people were made of cornmeal and corn liquor. As my Kentucky kinfolk would say, we're made out of Johnny cakes and moonshine. All right. Well, the cornmeal, the body, that's the main crops that they grow. This corn liquor part. Now, most of y'all are probably underage, actually, so you've never actually experienced alcohol before, right? Okay. Then again, maybe when you were 13 or 15 years old, you snuck a little brandy or a little whiskey out of Dad's cabinet. Probably got in a lot of trouble for that. I remember being at Thanksgiving dinner when I was like 12 or 13, and all my uncles are making White Russians. It looked like vanilla milkshake to me. I know what it was. So, I'm drinking the stuff. It's delicious. Suddenly, wow, little George is about passed out. And remember the very first time you ever had alcohol, the way you could feel the warmth of it going through your body, kind of emanating out, especially if it was like brandy or whiskey or something, that weird enlivening kind of feeling that it gives you when you're not used to it? All right, well, the Mayans recognized this as well. And they concluded, like all ancient peoples did, that alcohol was a gift from the gods, a blessed gift that proves how much they love us, basically. So for the Mayans, it's also the very vital energies that animates you and gives you life. Okay. After reading this part, did it remind you of any other religious literature where a basic, bread-like carbohydrate and an alcohol is used in some ceremonial, sacramental way? Communion. What's communion?
It represents the blood of Christ, which is the wine,
Mm-hmm.
and then his body is the bread.
Wow. What in the world does that mean?
Well,
Is Jesus a loaf of Wonder Bread?
no.
Is he pre-sliced for my convenience? What? When you do communion, you're basically ritually acting out the Last Supper, right? When you're taking the bread, taking the wine, it's like you've become one of the disciples of Christ, as if you were at the Last Supper and enjoying the benefits of that association, right? But when Jesus said it originally at the Last Supper, why did he use this weird language? What did he mean by saying, the bread and wine, do this in remembrance of me? What was he trying to get him to remember?
That he's going to die on the cross, and that this is what we do. Like,
Well, that part comes later, actually.
yeah.
At the time, he just wants him to remember all that important wisdom that he taught him. What is the basic wisdom? If you look at all the sermons of Jesus, what's the basic message in all of them? How do you want you to live your life?
Pure.
Pure? I don't know what that means.
Like him. Like live like him. Like Jesus.
Like how? If I don't know who he is, I'm going to need some more descriptive words to tell me how to live.
Loving.
What are you, a bunch of heathens or something? What's that?
Loving.
Loving. The basic message is love God and love your neighbor, right? Be kind to your neighbor. Be a loving person. Don't be a jerk like the Romans, right? That's basically it. All right. So when he says, when he's sitting at the Last Supper, having his last meal with his disciples, and he wants them to remember the important message he gave, and he equates himself in his ministry with bread and wine. Why are bread and wine important? It's what they eat and drink every day. Everybody eats bread and drinks wine in the Mediterranean world. So what he's saying is that this way of living, this message, should be as basic to your life as food and water, as your basic, nourishment, your spiritual nourishment, basically. It's interesting how two different cultures on opposite sides of the globe that had no contact with each other both come up with such similar ways of using metaphorical language in this way. And Jesus was tapping into symbolism and imagery that was really much older than his time. Bread and wine has been a ceremonial thing in the Mediterranean for thousands of years beforehand. And it's just sort of common to take the basic nourishments and equate them to larger, more mystical things. In any case, they make proper humans, and they're what they're looking for. These folks, they communicate, they're productive, they're kind and thoughtful, resourceful and pious. They have all the characteristics that a good human ought to have. And then there's this weird part in the story where the gods get a little bit nervous about these creatures they've created. And what's the problem? They can see everything. They see. It says, what do you think of the world? Is that they can see it all, and there's like no limits to their vision. And it makes the gods nervous. So what do they do about it? They blow mist in their eyes, and they cloud around their eyes. So they can see just a little bit what's in front of them, but not very far. All right, this is the most abstruse element of the whole story. That we had this vision, and then our eyes were misted. What is it that the ancient Mayans were trying to communicate that maybe they didn't have fancy philosophical terms for, like we might have today, and so they're using this imagery to try to communicate it? What is it about our lives, about human existence, that maybe is described in this way? Yes, ma'am.
We're not meant to be that powerful and know everything like we have to work.
Well, we do get this warning, this limitation built into us, yes. But what does it mean that you have this great potential vision, but only a certain amount around you can be seen? Elaborate.
Well,
We really don't see the big picture. See what,
We don't quite see the big picture? Okay, yeah. We're certainly clever, rational beings. We should be able to, but we often don't. We don't have all the facts. We don't have all the evidence. We try to make sense of the world based on what we know, but we don't know everything. That's okay. That can be part of it. What else might we see this? How else are you limited in what you can do and accomplish in your life? Despite what you can imagine, what kind of limitations are built in? Your age. How long are you going to live?
Who knows?
Hmm?
I don't know how long.
What's the average human lifespan?
Like 60 or 70 years.
Yeah, 75 years or so, right? How many books can you get read in 75 years? You really think so?
Yeah.
Go to the library, see how many millions of books are there. What percentage of all the books ever written will you have time to read in your life? 5%? You really think you can read 5% of the books ever written in a mere 75-year lifespan? No.
1%.
You will not be able to read 1/1000th of 1/1000th of 1% of the books ever written. Is that kind of depressing? Sometimes libraries depress me. I see all these books that probably have wonderful things that would enrich me, and I do not have time to read them all. And choose carefully what you're going to read, because there's all kinds of things. Every time you make a choice, something else, you're not going to get read. How many of you like to travel and plan to travel and see the world one day? How many of you think you'll get to all 7 continents before you die? Even Antarctica?
Maybe not that.
Maybe not
But
that.
I've already been to like 3 of them.
Yeah, I've been to 3 as well. But that's less than half. And I'm, not a young spring chicken anymore. How many of you will get to 50 countries? Read 10,000 books? How much can you get? How many of you are going to actually find time to get trained and go scuba diving or parasailing or hang gliding? Some of y'all at the beginning of class talked about how you want to go skydiving one day. But a lot of you are going to go to your grave without ever having accomplished your dream of skydiving. You can imagine all of these things you could do, only a small percentage will you ever get done. And your limited lifetime also has something else that particularly is vexing to historians. Just like I'm interested in the past, I'm interested in the future. And I watch the news and I see how civilization's unfolding. But I'm only going to get to see another few decades. Do you think the United States of America will still be here 500 years from now?
Yeah.
1,000 years from now? No? God, y'all are really pessimistic. Oh, there's this weird mood in your generation these days. I've been asking that question for 20 years. And people used to say, yeah, we'll still be here. Nowadays, you're like, yeah, no. Y'all are kind of, kind of depressed about the state of our country, I think. Who knows? I don't know. I would love to be able to see 1,000 years in the future just to see how it all turns out, but I don't get to. All of these things limit us, and when we realize these ways that we are limited from fulfilling everything we can imagine we could do, it creates a special kind of suffering and anguish to become conscious of these limitations. And it's just part of the human condition. We imagine far more than we can ever actually do or achieve. So maybe that's what they're talking about. Did anybody feel yourself reminded of another religious story, also from the Bible, when you got to that part about the mist in the eyes and God putting limitations on us? What happens with Adam and Eve that's similar?
They ate the fruit from the tree, and their eyes were open.
Right. And they saw too much and they knew too much. Now, when God throws them out of the garden, he also throws them out because he's worried that if he doesn't, they might then go and do what?
Eat the other tree.
What's that other tree?
The immortal one.
Tree of life, exactly. They eat from the tree of life and they become immortal. There'll be no difference between humans and the God. So the ancient Hebrews, whose story this is, imagine that the main difference between gods and animals were that animals don't have moral awareness. They just live, innocent, or law of the jungle, and that they die. And God has moral awareness and is immortal. We are these weird creatures that usurped part of what should have been just God's, eating from that tree we weren't supposed to. And then we're thrown out before we can, complete that process. It's weird how on, again, opposite sides of the globe, cultures never knew each other, both have this idea that maybe humans were a little more than the gods had bargained on. We're a little more rambunctious, a little more dangerous than they had really conceived at first. And there's a need to put limitations on what we can do. Maybe a reflection of how destructive we know we can be. In any case, the gods finally have creatures just the way they want them. They have all the right attributes and qualities, and they've got a limitation built in so they don't get a little bit out of hand. And so it's time for the first day. And notice how the gods are trying to orchestrate all of this. The work of nature is like this great work of art. And the sun's going to rise and everything's going to come together. And so they prepare all of it. They create some haughty corn wives for our 4 corn men here. And they wake up with beautiful corn wives beside them. And they witness the very first sunrise of the first day. The gods have brought it all together. And when the first humans see the beauty of the world on the first day, how do they react? They dance. Exactly. Words fail them. They just break out into dancing. That most awesome of completely irrational things that humans do. No function at all, but it always makes you feel joyous, doesn't it? And that's how the Mayans imagine where the world came from. Did you like the story?
Yeah.
It's a pretty nice story, isn't it? All right. So what I want you to be able to think about is the difference between the literal level of the plot and then the deeper symbolic and metaphorical levels that the plot carries you to. And this should be a lesson you apply every time you study any piece of literature. Remember, when you go to write an essay on Moby Dick or Frankenstein or something, the last thing your professor wants to read is you regurgitating the plot of the story. That is not what writing an essay is about. You've got to get to where that plot takes you.